Major Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other pilots. Growing up on a ranch in Montana, she learned to fly crop dusters before she could legally drive a car. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, taught her that the sky wasn't just a place to visit, it was a battlefield where precision meant the difference between life and death. When she joined the Air Force at 18, everyone expected her to follow the traditional path. Fighter jets, high-altitude missions, the glory that came with supersonic speeds and breaking the sound barrier. But Sarah was drawn to something else entirely. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, nicknamed the Warthog, was considered the ugly duckling of military aircraft. It wasn't fast, it wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't glamorous. What it was, however, was tough. Built around a massive GAU-8 cannon that could tear through enemy armor like paper, the A-10 was designed for one purpose: close air support. Getting low, getting dirty, and keeping ground troops alive. Sarah excelled in A-10 training like no pilot before her. Her instructors were amazed at her ability to thread the aircraft through impossible terrain, staying below radar while maintaining perfect target acquisition. She had an instinct for reading the landscape, understanding how mountains and valleys could hide an aircraft that knew how to use them. By the time she earned her major's stripes at 28, she had logged more low-level flight hours than pilots with twice her experience. The mission briefing that would change everything came on a scorching Tuesday morning in Afghanistan. The conference room at Bugram Airfield was packed with the usual mix of Air Force personnel, Army commanders, and special operations teams. Sarah sat in the back, her flight suit still bearing the morning's dust from pre-flight checks. She was used to being one of the few women in these briefings, but today felt different. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Colonel James Harrison, the mission commander, stood before a large tactical display showing the mountainous terrain of the Hindu Kush. Red markers indicated enemy positions, blue showed friendly forces, and a single yellow dot marked their objective, a Taliban stronghold that had been coordinating attacks against coalition forces for months. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of years spent in combat zones, "we have a problem. Intelligence indicates that the enemy has moved significant anti-aircraft capabilities into this valley. Surface-to-air missiles, radar-guided artillery, the works. Our previous high-altitude strikes have been ineffective due to the cave systems they've built into the mountainside." He clicked a remote, and the display zoomed in on the target area. The terrain was brutal, narrow valleys surrounded by peaks that stretched nearly 15,000 feet above sea level. Roads were nothing more than goat paths carved into cliff faces, and the Taliban had chosen their location well. Any conventional attack would have to come from above, directly into their defensive envelope. "We need close air support," Harrison continued, "but the mountain passes are too narrow for safe flight operations. The valleys are death traps, too many places for hidden SAM sites, too many opportunities for crossfire from multiple positions." That's when Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood up. Morrison was a Navy SEAL with more than a decade of experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. His team had been tasked with the ground assault component of the mission, and his reputation for successful operations was legendary among special operations forces. He was the kind of man who could rappel down a cliff face while calling in artillery strikes, the kind of soldier who never accepted that anything was impossible. "Sir," Morrison said, his voice calm but firm, "my team needs air support for this mission to work. We'll be outnumbered 10-1 once we're on the ground. But I've studied those mountain passes for weeks now, and I'm telling you, it's impossible to fly that low safely. The altitude changes are too rapid, the valleys too narrow. Even the best pilots can't maintain control at those speeds in that terrain." Morrison's words carried weight in the room. SEALs didn't make statements like that lightly. If Jake Morrison said something was impossible, people listened. He had survived missions that existed only in classified files, had seen the absolute best of military aviation in the most challenging conditions imaginable. "The mountains create wind shears that can flip an aircraft in seconds," Morrison continued, pulling up his own intelligence reports. "We're talking about valleys that are sometimes less than 100 feet wide, with walls that go straight up for thousands of feet. Add in the enemy's defensive positions, and you're asking pilots to thread a needle while people are shooting at them." Sarah felt something stir inside her as she listened to Morrison's assessment. She had flown in mountains before, not these mountains, but similar terrain in training exercises in Colorado and Nevada. She understood the challenges he was describing, but she also understood something that Morrison might not: the A-10 wasn't like other aircraft. It was built to take damage, built to fly low, built to operate in conditions that would destroy other planes. The briefing continued for another hour, with with various officers discussing alternative approaches. Helicopter insertion was considered too risky due to the altitude and enemy presence. Artillery support was limited by the mountain terrain and the risk of collateral damage to nearby villages. Long-range missile strikes had already proven ineffective against the hardened targets. As the meeting began to wind down, Sarah realized that Morrison's team might be walking into a suicide mission without proper air support. The SEAL commander had made it clear that his men could handle the ground assault, but only if they had close air support to suppress enemy positions and provide cover during their withdrawal. That's when Sarah made a decision that would define her career. She stood up, feeling every eye in the room turn toward her. The silence was immediate and heavy. In a room full of combat veterans and special operations legends, a female A-10 pilot was about to challenge the assessment of one of the most respected SEALs in the military. "Sir," she said, addressing Colonel Harrison, but knowing her words were really directed at Morrison, "I'd like to volunteer for the close air support mission." Morrison turned to look at her, his expression showing a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. He had worked with A-10 pilots before, good ones, but the mission parameters they were discussing were beyond anything he had ever seen attempted. "Major Mitchell," Harrison said, consulting his notes, "you understand the terrain challenges that Commander Morrison has outlined?" "Yes, sir, I do," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "And I believe they can be overcome." Morrison stood up again, this time facing Sarah directly. The room was completely silent now, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Morrison wasn't the kind of man to dismiss someone's capabilities based on gender or experience, but he also wasn't going to risk his team's lives on wishful thinking. "Major," Morrison said, his tone respectful but firm, "I've been flying in helicopters through mountain terrain for 15 years. I've seen what those altitude changes and wind patterns can do to aircraft. The valleys we're talking about would require flying at speeds and altitudes that no fixed-wing aircraft can safely maintain. You'd be asking the A-10 to perform like a helicopter, but with the weight and momentum of a jet." Sarah had expected this response. Morrison wasn't being dismissive, he was being realistic based on his extensive experience. But Sarah had something that Morrison had never seen: hundreds of hours flying the A-10 in conditions that other pilots considered impossible. "Commander Morrison," she said, "the A-10 has capabilities that might surprise you. It's not just about speed and altitude, it's about understanding how the aircraft responds to terrain, how to use the mountains themselves as cover, how to fly the valleys instead of fighting them." Morrison looked at her for a long moment, clearly processing her words. He was a man who had built his career on never underestimating anyone or anything, but he was also responsible for the lives of his team members. Making the wrong decision here wouldn't just mean mission failure, it could mean that good men would die. "Major Mitchell," Morrison said finally, "I respect your confidence, but this isn't about individual skill. The physics of flight in that terrain make it impossible for any aircraft to provide effective close air support. The altitude changes alone would require constant power adjustments that would make accurate weapons delivery impossible." The challenge was now explicit. Morrison wasn't just saying the mission was difficult, he was saying it was impossible. And, in a room full of military professionals, impossible was a word that carried absolute weight. Sarah understood that if she was going to change Morrison's mind, she would need to do more than just talk about her capabilities. "Sir," Sarah said, turning back to Colonel Harrison, "I'd like to request permission to conduct a reconnaissance flight over the target area. Let me show you what the A-10 can do in that terrain." Harrison looked back and forth between Sarah and Morrison, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of the proposal. A reconnaissance flight would provide valuable intelligence regardless of the outcome, but it would also put a pilot and aircraft at risk in terrain that his most experienced special operations commander had deemed impossible to navigate safely. Morrison, to his credit, didn't try to talk Harrison out of approving the flight. Instead, he made a counter-proposal that surprised everyone in the room. "Colonel," Morrison said, "if Major Mitchell is willing to attempt this reconnaissance, I'd like to request permission to observe from the ground. My team can establish an observation post in the target area. If she can successfully demonstrate close air support capabilities in that terrain, we'll know the mission is feasible. If not..." He left the sentence hanging, but everyone understood the implication. Harrison considered the proposal for several minutes. It was highly irregular, but the mission was critical enough to justify taking some risks. The Taliban stronghold had been responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed dozens of coalition soldiers over the past 6 months. If there was any chance that Sarah's approach could work, it was worth exploring. Approved, Harrison said finally. Major Mitchell, you'll conduct a reconnaissance flight tomorrow at 0800 hours. Commander Morrison, your team will establish an observation post by 0600. This will be a demonstration only, no live weapons, no engagement with enemy forces. We observe, we evaluate, and, then, we decide how to proceed. As the briefing broke up, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and pressure unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had just volunteered to attempt something that one of the military's most respected special operations commanders believed was impossible. Tomorrow, she would have to prove that the A-10 Thunderbolt II could do what no one thought possible, provide effective close air support in terrain that had never been successfully navigated by fixed-wing aircraft. Morrison approached her as the room emptied. Major Mitchell, he said, extending his hand, I hope you prove me wrong tomorrow. My men's lives depend on having air support for this mission. Sarah shook his hand, feeling the calluses earned through years of combat operations. Commander, she said, I don't intend to prove you wrong. I intend to show you what's possible when you understand your aircraft and respect the terrain instead of fighting it. That evening, Sarah spent hours studying topographical maps of the target area, analyzing wind patterns, elevation changes, and approach vectors. She had flown in challenging terrain before, but tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just be flying for herself, she would be flying to prove that impossible was just another word for a challenge that hadn't been met yet. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Morrison's SEAL team needed close air support to survive their mission. The Taliban stronghold needed to be eliminated to save coalition lives. And Sarah needed to demonstrate that the A-10 Thunderbolt II, in the hands of the right pilot, could redefine what was possible in military aviation. As she prepared her flight plan, Sarah thought about her father's words from years ago, the sky isn't just a place to visit, it's a battlefield where precision means the difference between life and death. Tomorrow, she would find out if those words were true in ways she had never imagined. The alarm in Sarah's quarters went off at 0430 hours, but she was already awake. She had spent the night going over every detail of the flight plan, visualizing each turn, each altitude change, each moment when the A-10 would be most vulnerable in the narrow mountain valleys. Her flight suit lay ready on the chair beside her bed, and her helmet sat on the small desk where she had spread out the topographical maps one final time. The pre-dawn air at Bagram was crisp and thin, carrying the familiar sense of jet fuel, dust, and the distant smoke from cooking fires in nearby villages. Sarah made her way to the flight line, where her A-10 was already being prepared by the ground crew. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, her crew chief, had been working on the aircraft since 0400, ensuring that every system was perfectly calibrated for the challenging flight ahead. She's ready for you, Major, Rodriguez said as Sarah approached. I've given her the full inspection twice. All systems are green, and I've loaded the external cameras for your reconnaissance mission. No ordnance today, just like you requested. Sarah nodded, grateful for Rodriguez's attention to detail. The sergeant had been maintaining A-10s for over a decade, and his expertise had kept her aircraft flying through countless missions. Today, that expertise might make the difference between success and catastrophe. Thanks, Rodriguez, Sarah said, beginning her own pre-flight inspection. Keep monitoring the radio frequencies. If this goes well, we might be back here this afternoon planning a real mission. Yes, ma'am, Rodriguez replied. And, Major? Good luck in there. I've heard what you're attempting, and I've never seen terrain like that navigated by an A-10. But, if anyone can do it, you can. Sarah completed her walk-around inspection, checking control surfaces, engine intakes, and landing gear. The A-10 sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its distinctive twin engines and straight wings giving it an appearance that was both ungainly and purposeful. This aircraft had been designed in the 1970s for one specific mission, killing enemy tanks and supporting ground troops in close combat. It was tough, reliable, and forgiving, qualities that Sarah hoped would be enough to get her through the next few hours. At 0630, Sarah received word that Morrison's SEAL team had successfully infiltrated the target area and established their observation post. The team had hiked through the night, using night vision equipment and GPS to navigate terrain that was treacherous even on foot. They were positioned on a ridge overlooking the primary valley that Sarah would need to navigate, giving them a perfect vantage point to observe her demonstration flight. The radio crackled to life in Sarah's headset as she strapped into the cockpit. Warthog 1, this is Overwatch. We are in position and ready to observe. Weather conditions are clear, winds are variable but manageable. The valley is all yours. Morrison's voice was calm and professional, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension. The SEAL commander was about to watch a pilot attempt something he was convinced was impossible. If Sarah failed, it wouldn't just mean that his assessment had been correct, it would mean that his team would have to find another way to complete their mission, assuming they could find one at all. Sarah ran through her pre-start checklist, her hands moving automatically through procedures she had performed thousands of times. Engine start, hydraulics check, flight controls, navigation systems, every component had to be perfect for what she was about to attempt. The A-10's twin General Electric TF-34 engines spooled up with their distinctive high-pitched whine, and Sarah felt the familiar vibration through the airframe that told her the aircraft was ready to fly. Bagram Tower, Warthog 1 requesting taxi and takeoff clearance for reconnaissance mission, Sarah transmitted. Warthog 1, Bagram Tower. You are cleared to taxi runway 27. Winds are calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting out there, Major. The tower controller's words carried more weight than usual. Everyone on the base knew what Sarah was attempting, and the success or failure of her demonstration could determine the fate of Morrison's mission. Sarah taxied to the runway, completed her final checks, and advanced the throttles to takeoff power. The A-10 accelerated down the runway with its characteristic deliberate pace. Unlike fighter jets that leaped into the air with explosive acceleration, the Warthog built speed methodically, its heavy construction and low-mounted engines requiring more runway than sleeker aircraft. But, once airborne, the A-10 transformed from an awkward ground vehicle into a precise instrument of flight. Sarah climbed to 5,000 feet and turned toward the target area, following a flight path that would take her through progressively more challenging terrain. She started with wide valleys and gentle slopes, allowing herself to warm up to the mountain flying conditions while testing the aircraft's response to the thin air and variable winds. The Hindu Kush Mountains stretched out below her like a frozen sea of stone and snow. Peaks jutted skyward to altitudes that challenged even the A-10's service ceiling, and valleys wound between them like serpentine canyons carved by ancient geological forces. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, a landscape that had humbled armies for centuries and had never been successfully navigated by close air support aircraft. Warthog 1, this is Overwatch. We have visual contact. You're approaching the outer perimeter of our area of operations. The primary target valley is approximately 10 kilometers northeast of your current position. Copy, Overwatch, Sarah replied. Beginning approach to target area. Descending to operational altitude. This was the moment of truth. Sarah pushed the stick forward and began descending toward the valley floor, watching her altimeter unwind as the mountains rose up around her. At 3,000 feet above ground level, she was already lower than most military aircraft would ever fly in mountainous terrain. But, for what she was attempting, 3,000 feet was still too high. As she approached the mouth of the target valley, Sarah could see why Morrison and his team had considered the mission impossible. The valley was narrow, barely 300 feet wide at its mouth, and it grew narrower as it wound deeper into the mountains. The walls rose nearly vertically on both sides, creating a canyon that seemed designed to trap aircraft rather than accommodate them. Sarah reduced her airspeed to just above stalling speed and continued her descent. At 1,000 feet above the valley floor, the A-10 was flying between mountain walls that towered thousands of feet above her wings. The sensation was like flying through a canyon on an alien world, where the normal rules of aviation seemed suspended. Overwatch, Warthog 1. Entering the target valley now. Altitude 800 feet above ground level, airspeed 200 knots. From his position on the ridge, Morrison watched through high-powered binoculars as Sarah's A-10 disappeared into the valley below. He had flown in helicopters through similar terrain, but he had never seen a fixed-wing aircraft attempt what she was doing. The physics seemed impossible, the valley was too narrow, the turns too sharp, the altitude changes too dramatic for an aircraft with the A-10 size and momentum. But, as he tracked the aircraft through the valley, Morrison began to see something extraordinary. Sarah wasn't fighting the terrain, she was using it. Instead of maintaining a straight course through the valley, she was following its natural contours, banking into turns that used the mountain walls themselves as navigation aids. When the valley narrowed, she reduced airspeed and altitude, allowing the A-10 to slip through gaps that seemed impossibly small. When it widened, she increased speed and gained altitude, using the extra space to build energy for the next challenging section. Jesus Christ, whispered Petty Officer Martinez, Morrison's spotter. Sir, she's actually doing it. She's flying that thing like it's a helicopter, but maintaining fixed-wing performance." Morrison didn't respond immediately. He was too busy trying to understand what he was seeing. The A-10 was now flying so low that it was occasionally disappearing behind ridgelines before reappearing in the next section of valley. Sarah was using terrain masking, a technique usually reserved for helicopters, while maintaining the speed and weapons capability of a jet aircraft. In the cockpit, Sarah was experiencing flying unlike anything she had ever done before. The A-10 was responding to her inputs with precision that surprised even her, slipping through the mountain valleys like it had been designed specifically for this kind of flying. She could feel the aircraft's weight and momentum, but she was learning to use those characteristics instead of fighting them. The key was understanding that the A-10's low stall speed and excellent low-speed handling made it capable of flying much slower than other jets, while its rugged construction allowed her to fly closer to the terrain than pilots of more delicate aircraft would dare. Combined with her instinctive understanding of mountain flying techniques learned in civilian aviation, Sarah was discovering that the Warthog could do things that no one had ever imagined. Overwatch, Warthog 1. Approaching the primary target area. Descending to attack altitude for demonstration pass. Copy, Warthog 1. We have you in sight. You are cleared for demonstration attack run. Sarah lined up on the target coordinates that Morrison's team had provided, a cave system built into the mountainside that would normally be impossible to attack without exposing an aircraft to devastating crossfire from multiple directions. But Sarah's approach was unlike anything that had been attempted before. Instead of attacking from above, where the aircraft would be vulnerable to surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery, Sarah approached from below, using the valley floor as cover until the last possible moment. The A-10 climbed sharply up the mountainside, popped up over a ridgeline for just seconds to acquire the target, then dove back into the safety of the valley before any defensive systems could track and engage. From Morrison's observation post, the demonstration was nothing short of spectacular. The A-10 appeared over the ridgeline for less than 5 seconds, but, in that time, Sarah had demonstrated perfect target acquisition and weapons solution. If she had been carrying live ordnance, the target would have been destroyed before enemy defenders could even identify the attacking aircraft. Warthog 1, Overwatch. Outstanding run. Target was acquired and solution was perfect. How copy? Copy, Overwatch. Beginning egress maneuvers. Sarah's extraction from the target area was as impressive as her approach had been. Instead of climbing to a safe altitude and flying directly back to base, the standard procedure that would have exposed her to enemy fire for several minutes, she continued flying nap of the earth through the valley system, using the mountains themselves as cover for her withdrawal. The flight back through the valleys required even more precision than the approach, because Sarah was now flying the route in reverse, dealing with terrain features and wind patterns that presented themselves differently from the opposite direction. But the A-10 continued to perform flawlessly, slipping through gaps in the mountains that seemed too small for an aircraft of its size. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the mountain valleys and climbed to cruising altitude for the flight back to Bagram. Her heart was pounding from the adrenaline of the demonstration, but she felt a deep satisfaction that she had never experienced before. She had just proved that the impossible was possible, that the A-10 Thunderbolt II could provide close air support in terrain that had previously been considered off-limits to fixed-wing aircraft. Bagram Tower, Warthog 1 requesting landing clearance, Sarah transmitted as the airbase came into view. Warthog 1, Bagram Tower. You are cleared for straight-in approach runway 27. Welcome back, Major. The whole base has been following your mission. As Sarah touched down and taxied back to the flight line, she could see that a crowd had gathered near her parking spot. Word of her demonstration had spread throughout the base, and everyone wanted to see the pilot who had just redefined what was possible in military aviation. But the most important observer was Morrison, who arrived at the flight line just as Sarah was shutting down her engines. The SEAL commander approached her as she climbed down from the cockpit, his expression showing a mixture of amazement and professional respect. "Major Mitchell," Morrison said, extending his hand again, "I owe you an apology. What you just did shouldn't be possible, but you made it look routine. My team is ready to proceed with the mission whenever you are." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the weight of what had just been accomplished. "Commander Morrison, you weren't wrong about the challenges. But sometimes the solution isn't to avoid the impossible, it's to find a new way to make it possible." Colonel Harrison appeared moments later, having monitored the entire flight from the command center. "Major Mitchell," he said, "that was the most impressive display of flying I've seen in 25 years of military service. You've just opened up tactical possibilities that we never knew existed. As Sarah completed her post-flight procedures and debriefed with the intelligence officers, she realized that her demonstration had been about more than just proving a point. She had shown that innovation and unconventional thinking could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The Taliban stronghold that had been considered unreachable was now vulnerable, and Morrison's SEAL team would have the close air support they needed to complete their mission safely. The impossible had become possible, and, tomorrow, Sarah would prove that it could be done under combat conditions. The mission briefing for Operation Mountain Thunder began at 0500 hours, just 18 hours after Sarah's demonstration flight had proved that close air support in the Hindu Kush valleys was not only possible but tactically superior to conventional approaches. The same conference room that had witnessed the initial challenge between Sarah and Morrison was now packed with personnel from multiple units, all focused on executing the most complex mountain warfare operation attempted in Afghanistan. Colonel Harrison stood before the tactical display, but this time the red enemy markers didn't seem quite so intimidating. Sarah's reconnaissance flight had provided intelligence that transformed how everyone viewed the target area. The narrow valleys that had seemed like death traps were now potential avenues of approach. The vertical mountain walls that had appeared to offer perfect defensive positions for the enemy could also provide cover for attacking aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison began, what we witnessed yesterday has fundamentally changed our tactical options. Major Mitchell has demonstrated that the A-10 can operate in terrain we previously considered impossible for fixed-wing aircraft. Today, we're going to put that capability to work. Morrison sat in the front row, studying satellite photos of the target area with new eyes. His SEAL team had spent years learning to operate in environments that challenged every aspect of their training and equipment. Yesterday, he had watched a pilot accomplish something that redefined his understanding of what aircraft could do in mountain warfare. The Taliban stronghold consists of 3 primary positions, Harrison continued, updating the display to show detailed target information. Position Alpha is the main command bunker, built into the mountainside approximately 2,000 meters up the primary valley. Position Bravo is an anti-aircraft installation covering the valley approach, and Position Charlie is a supply depot that supports the entire complex. Sarah studied the targets from her seat in the middle of the room. During her reconnaissance flight, she had identified additional details that hadn't been visible in satellite imagery. The Taliban had chosen their positions well, but they had made one crucial assumption, that any air attack would come from above, following conventional high-altitude bombing patterns. Major Mitchell, Harrison said, based on your reconnaissance, what do you recommend for the attack sequence? Sarah stood and moved to the tactical display. Sir, the enemy has positioned their defenses to counter traditional air attacks. The anti-aircraft installation at Position Bravo is oriented upward, designed to engage aircraft coming over the ridgelines. But, if we approach from the valley floor, we can neutralize Bravo before their guns can depress enough to engage us. She traced a flight path on the display that showed an approach route that seemed impossible to anyone who hadn't seen her demonstration flight. The A-10 would enter the valley system from the southwest, fly nap of the earth through 3 separate valleys, then pop up for brief attack runs before disappearing back into the terrain. Once Bravo is eliminated, Sarah continued, we can provide close air support for Commander Morrison's ground assault on the command bunker. The supply depot at Charlie can be taken out during egress, cutting off any possibility of reinforcement or resupply. Morrison stood to address the tactical aspects of the ground operation. My team will insert via helicopter at LZ Echo, approximately 5 kilometers south of the target area. We'll approach the command bunker on foot, using the rocky terrain to mask our movement. Major Mitchell's air support will be critical during the final assault phase. We'll need suppressive fire to keep the defenders pinned down while we breach the bunker complex. The coordination between air and ground forces for this mission was unlike anything that had been attempted before. Traditional close air support involved aircraft circling overhead at safe altitudes, responding to radio calls from ground controllers. But Sarah's approach required split-second timing and perfect communication, because the A-10 would be visible to enemy defenders for only moments during each attack run. The key, Sarah explained, is understanding that we're not just providing air support, we're creating a mobile weapons system that can strike from multiple directions in rapid sequence. The enemy won't be able to predict where the next attack is coming from, because we'll be using different valley approaches for each target. Flight Surgeon Captain Rebecca Torres raised a concern that had been weighing on everyone's minds. Major Mitchell, the physiological stresses of the flying you demonstrated yesterday are extreme. The rapid altitude changes, the high G turns, the mental concentration required. Are you certain you can maintain that performance level under combat conditions? It was a valid question. Sarah's demonstration flight had been challenging enough without the added stress of enemy fire, live weapons, and the knowledge that people on the ground were counting on her for their survival. Combat flying was fundamentally different from demonstration flying, and everyone in the room understood that. Dr. Torres, Sarah replied, I've been training for this my entire career, just without realizing it. The mountain flying techniques I learned in civilian aviation, combined with the combat training I've received in the A-10, have prepared me for exactly this type of mission. The stress is manageable because I understand the aircraft's capabilities and limitations. Morrison interjected with his own assessment. Major Mitchell, my team has worked with close air support in every conceivable environment. What you're proposing requires a level of precision and timing that we've never experienced before. Are you confident that you can deliver ordnance accurately while flying the profile you demonstrated yesterday? Commander Morrison, Sarah said, the A-10's weapons systems are designed to function in exactly these conditions. The GAU-8 cannon is gyro-stabilized and can deliver accurate fire even during aggressive maneuvering. The Maverick missiles have lock-on after-launch capability, which means I can acquire targets during brief exposure windows and let the missiles guide themselves to impact. The technical discussion continued for another hour, covering everything from radio frequencies to emergency extraction procedures. Every aspect of the mission had to be coordinated perfectly, because there would be no opportunity for do-overs if something went wrong in the narrow mountain valleys. By 0800 hours, the final mission parameters had been established. Sarah would conduct 3 separate attack runs, each targeting a different enemy position. Morrison's SEAL team would begin their ground assault immediately after the anti-aircraft position was neutralized. The entire operation was expected to last less than 30 minutes from first contact to final extraction. As the briefing concluded, Sarah made her way to the flight line for her pre-mission preparations. The A-10 was loaded with a mixed ordnance package specifically selected for the mountain terrain mission. AGM-65 Maverick missiles for the hardened targets, GAU-8 cannon ammunition for suppressive fire, and defensive flares in case enemy forces had portable surface-to-air missiles that weren't detected during reconnaissance. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting with the aircraft, having spent the early morning hours ensuring that every system was perfectly calibrated. Major, he said as Sarah approached, she's loaded and ready. I've triple-checked the weapons systems and added extra flare dispensers based on the intelligence reports. You've got everything you need to bring the thunder. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection with even more care than usual. This mission would push both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits, and there could be no mechanical failures or system malfunctions. The A-10's reputation for reliability was about to be tested in conditions that its original designers had never imagined. At 0930 hours, Morrison's team departed Bugram in 2 MH-60 Black Hawks, beginning their insertion into the target area. The helicopters would approach from the east, using a different route than Sarah would follow to avoid alerting enemy forces to the full scope of the attack. The SEALs would be on the ground and in position by 1000 hours, giving them time to establish observation posts and confirm that enemy dispositions matched the intelligence reports. Sarah started her engines at 0945, beginning the sequence of checks and preparations that would culminate in the most challenging mission of her career. As the twin turbofans spooled up to operating speed, she reviewed her flight plan one final time, visualizing each turn, each attack run, each moment when split-second decisions could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Bugram Tower, Warthog 1 requesting taxi and takeoff clearance for combat mission, Sarah transmitted. Warthog 1, Bugram Tower. You are cleared to taxi runway 27. Winds are light and variable, visibility unlimited. Good hunting, Major. Bring our boys home safe. The taxi to the runway seemed longer than usual, perhaps because Sarah was acutely aware that this mission would either validate everything she had proved yesterday or demonstrate the dangers of pushing aircraft and pilot beyond reasonable limits. The A-10 felt heavier with its full combat load, but the engines responded normally as she completed her final checks. Sarah advanced the throttles to take off power and felt the familiar acceleration as the Warthog built speed down the runway. But, this time, instead of climbing to cruising altitude, she stayed low, beginning immediately to practice the terrain-following techniques she would need once she reached the mountains. Overwatch, Warthog 1. Departing Bugram, estimated time to target area 20 minutes. How copy? Warthog 1, Overwatch. Copy your departure. We are in position and standing by. All enemy positions appear normal, no indication they're aware of our presence. Morrison's voice carried the calm professionalism that had made him legendary among special operations forces, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension. In 20 minutes, theory would become reality. The technique she had demonstrated in a practice flight would be used to deliver lethal ordnance against enemy targets, while his team counted on her precision for their survival. As Sarah flew toward the mountains, she reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she had been just another A-10 pilot, competent but unremarkable. Now she was about to execute a mission that could revolutionize close air support tactics for mountain warfare operations around the world. The Hindu Kush Mountains appeared ahead, their snow-covered peaks gleaming in the morning sunlight. Somewhere in those valleys, Taliban fighters were going about their daily routines, unaware that their supposedly impregnable stronghold was about to be attacked in a way they had never experienced before. Warthog 1, Overwatch. You're approaching the outer perimeter. All stations report ready for mission execution. Copy, Overwatch. Warthog 1 is beginning approach to target area. Time to first attack run, 5 minutes. Sarah reduced altitude and began her descent into the valley system that would hide her approach until the moment of attack. The morning air was clear and calm, perfect conditions for the precise flying that the mission would require. As the mountain walls closed in around her aircraft, Sarah felt the same sense of focus and determination that had carried her through yesterday's demonstration. The difference was that this time, when she squeezed the trigger, people would die. The mission wasn't just about proving what was possible, it was about using those capabilities to eliminate enemies who had killed coalition soldiers and terrorized Afghan civilians for months. Overwatch, Warthog 1. Entering attack corridor now. First target in sight. Morrison watched from his concealed position as Sarah's A-10 disappeared into the valley below. In 60 seconds, the most audacious close air support mission ever attempted would begin, and the Taliban stronghold that had seemed untouchable would discover that there was no such thing as impossible when an innovative pilot met an aircraft designed to take punishment and deliver devastating firepower. Sarah's first target appeared through the mountain haze exactly where intelligence had predicted it would be. The anti-aircraft installation at Position Bravo was built into a rocky outcropping that provided perfect fields of fire against aircraft approaching from above, but the Taliban defenders had never considered the possibility of an attack from below. Their weapons were oriented skyward, designed to engage targets coming over the ridgelines at conventional altitudes. The A-10 climbed sharply up the mountainside, using a technique that Sarah had perfected during countless hours of mountain flying training. She pulled the aircraft into a near-vertical climb, trading airspeed for altitude while keeping the Warthog's nose pointed directly at the target. For 3 seconds, she was completely exposed to enemy fire, but those 3 seconds were enough to acquire the target and achieve missile lock. Rifle away, Sarah transmitted, indicating the launch of an AGM-65 Maverick missile. The weapon separated from the A-10's wing pylon and ignited its rocket motor, accelerating toward the anti-aircraft position with deadly precision. Sarah immediately pushed the stick forward and dove back into the safety of the valley, using negative G-forces that would have been punishing in any other aircraft. The explosion echoed through the mountains as the Maverick's warhead detonated against the rocky emplacement. From his observation post, Morrison watched through binoculars as the Taliban position simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the precision strike that had come from an impossible angle of attack. Overwatch, Warthog 1. Bravo is down. Proceeding to target Charlie. Copy, Warthog 1. Outstanding strike. Charlie is approximately 2 kilometers northeast of your current position. Sarah had memorized every detail of the valley system during her reconnaissance flight, and she navigated through the narrow passages like she had been flying them for years. The A-10 slipped between mountain walls with clearances that were sometimes measured in feet rather than yards, but the aircraft responded to her inputs with precision that continued to amaze her. The supply depot at Position Charlie was hidden in a cave complex that had been carved into the mountainside by natural erosion and Taliban engineering. Satellite imagery had identified several entrances, but the exact layout of the underground facility remained unknown. Sarah's attack would have to collapse the main entrance and block the supply tunnels, effectively sealing the depot and preventing any reinforcement of the main command bunker. This target required a different approach. Instead of using missiles, Sarah planned to attack with the A-10's GAU-8 cannon, the massive 7-barrel Gatling gun that was the aircraft's primary weapon. The 30mm depleted uranium rounds could penetrate armor and concrete with devastating effectiveness, but delivering accurate cannon fire while flying nap of the earth through mountain valleys required a level of skill that few pilots possessed. Sarah lined up her attack run, approaching the target from a direction that would allow her to strafe along the length of the cave complex. The A-10 emerged from behind a rock formation traveling at nearly 300 knots, and Sarah had less than 2 seconds to acquire the target, adjust her aim, and fire before disappearing behind the next ridgeline. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with its distinctive growling roar, firing 60 rounds per second of depleted uranium penetrators. The weapon was designed to destroy main battle tanks, and its effects on the cave complex were catastrophic. Rock and concrete exploded outward as the cannon rounds chewed through the entrance structures, and secondary explosions indicated that ammunition and fuel stored in the caves had been detonated by the attack. Warthog 1, Overwatch. Direct hit on Charlie. Significant secondary explosions observed. Target is effectively destroyed. Copy, Overwatch. Proceeding to final target. Alpha is next. Position Alpha, the main command bunker, represented the most challenging target of the mission. Built into the mountainside like a medieval fortress, it was protected by both natural and artificial defenses that made direct attack extremely difficult. More importantly, Morrison's SEAL team was approaching the position on foot, and Sarah's attack would have to provide suppressive fire without endangering friendly forces. Warthog 1, this is Alpha Team Leader, Morrison's voice came over the radio. We are in position approximately 200 meters south of the target. We need suppressive fire on the northern approach to keep defenders from repositioning while we breach the main entrance. This was the most complex part of the mission. Sarah would have to deliver precise cannon fire within 200 meters of friendly forces while flying through terrain that allowed for only brief target exposure. The margin for error was essentially 0, too far north and she would hit Morrison's team, too far south and the suppressive fire would be ineffective. Sarah approached the target area from the west, flying up a narrow valley that would bring her to the command bunker from an unexpected angle. The Taliban defenders were focused on Morrison's approaching team and had no idea that an A-10 was about to appear from the valley below their position. The Warthog climbed sharply out of the valley, and Sarah had a split-second view of the entire tactical situation. She could see Morrison's team positioned behind rocky cover south of the bunker, and she could see Taliban fighters moving along the northern ridgeline to establish firing positions. Her cannon fire would have to hit the ridgeline precisely, suppressing the enemy movement without coming anywhere near the SEAL team. Sarah pressed the trigger and felt the A-10 shudder as the GAU-8 cannon unleashed its devastating firepower. The 30mm rounds impacted along the ridgeline in a precise line that sent enemy fighters diving for cover or eliminated them entirely. The suppressive fire lasted only 3 seconds, but it gave Morrison's team the opening they needed to advance on the bunker entrance. Alpha Team Leader, Warthog 1. Suppressive fire complete. Your path is clear. Copy, Warthog 1. Outstanding shooting. Beginning breach sequence now. Morrison's team moved with the precision that had made Navy SEALs legendary. Explosive charges were placed on the bunker entrance, and, within minutes the main door was blown open. The SEALs flowed into the complex like water through a broken dam, clearing rooms and neutralizing resistance with automatic weapons fire and grenades. But the mission wasn't over. Sarah maintained her position in the valley system, ready to provide additional close air support if Morrison's team encountered unexpected resistance. The A-10 circled through the narrow valleys like a predator waiting to strike, its weapons systems armed and ready to deliver devastation on demand. Warthog 1, Alpha Team Leader. We have secured the command center. Intelligence materials are being collected. Request cover for extraction in 10 minutes. Copy, Alpha Team Leader. I'll maintain overwatch until you're clear of the target area. Sarah used the 10-minute window to conduct reconnaissance of the surrounding valleys, looking for any signs of Taliban reinforcements or escape routes that might threaten Morrison's extraction. The combination of her low-altitude flying and the A-10's advanced sensors allowed her to detect movement that would have been invisible to satellites or high-altitude surveillance aircraft. Warthog 1, I have movement in Valley 7, approximately 3 kilometers southeast of your position. Appears to be enemy personnel attempting to escape the target area. Copy, Overwatch. I see them. Approximately 20 personnel moving on foot along the valley floor. The fleeing Taliban fighters represented a tactical opportunity that Sarah couldn't ignore. These were likely the senior leaders and specialists who had been running the command center, and allowing them to escape would mean that they could establish a new stronghold elsewhere in the mountains. Alpha Team Leader, Warthog 1. I have fleeing enemy personnel in sight. Request permission to engage. Warthog 1, you are cleared to engage. Don't let them get away. Sarah rolled the A-10 into a diving attack toward Valley 7, using the mountainous terrain to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The escaping Taliban fighters were moving along what they thought was a concealed route, but they had no idea that an aircraft capable of low-altitude flight was tracking their every movement. The attack was swift and decisive. Sarah emerged from behind a ridgeline and strafed the valley floor with cannon fire that caught the enemy personnel in the open with no cover available. The 30mm rounds impacted with devastating effectiveness, and the threat of Taliban leadership escaping to fight another day was eliminated in seconds. Alpha Team Leader, Warthog 1. Enemy personnel neutralized. Valley 7 is clear. Copy, Warthog 1. We are ready for extraction. Moving to pickup zone now. Morrison's team moved through the mountain terrain with the same speed and precision they had displayed during the assault phase. Within minutes, they had reached the designated extraction point where helicopters were waiting to carry them back to Bagram. The entire ground operation had lasted less than 40 minutes from insertion to extraction. Sarah maintained her overwatch position until Morrison's team was safely aboard the extraction helicopters and clear of the target area. Only then did she begin her own egress from the mountain valleys, climbing to cruising altitude for the flight back to base. Bagram Tower, Warthog 1 requesting landing clearance. Mission complete, all objectives achieved. Warthog 1, Bagram Tower. Outstanding job out there, Major. You are cleared for straight-in approach runway 27. Welcome home. As Sarah touched down at Bagram, she realized that she had just participated in a mission that would be studied and analyzed by military tacticians for years to come. The techniques she had developed for mountain warfare close air support had proved their effectiveness under combat conditions, and the Taliban stronghold that had seemed impregnable had been eliminated in a single coordinated operation. But, more importantly, Morrison's SEAL team had completed their mission without a single casualty, protected by close air support that had redefined what was possible in military aviation. The impossible had not only become possible, it had become devastatingly effective. 6 months later, Major Sarah Mitchell stood before a packed auditorium at the United States Air Force Weapons School, addressing an audience of the military's most experienced pilots and tactical experts. The mission that had begun with Morrison's assertion that low-altitude mountain flying was impossible had evolved into a new doctrine of close air support that was being implemented across multiple theaters of operation. The key to understanding what we accomplished, Sarah explained to the assembled pilots, wasn't about proving that the impossible was possible. It was about recognizing that our assumptions about what aircraft could and couldn't do were limiting our tactical options more than the actual capabilities of our equipment. The audience included pilots from every branch of the military, all eager to learn the techniques that had revolutionized mountain warfare tactics. Sarah's mission had been classified for months while military analysts studied every aspect of the operation, but the results had been so significant that the tactics were now being taught as standard curriculum at advanced flight training schools. Colonel Harrison, who had been promoted following the success of Operation Mountain Thunder, introduced the next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to hear from the ground commander who witnessed Major Mitchell's capabilities firsthand. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, United States Navy SEALs. Morrison approached the podium with the same calm confidence that had characterized his leadership during the mission. 6 months of reflection had given him perspective on what he had witnessed, and his assessment carried the weight of decades of special operations experience. When I first said that it was impossible to fly close air support in those mountain valleys, Morrison began, I was speaking from 15 years of experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. I had seen the best pilots in the world, flying the most advanced aircraft ever built, and I had never seen anything like what Major Mitchell accomplished. He paused, looking out at the audience of military aviators. What I learned from that mission wasn't just about flying techniques or aircraft capabilities. I learned that the most dangerous assumption we can make is that something can't be done just because it hasn't been done before. Morrison's words carried special weight because they came from someone who had initially been the most skeptical voice in the room. His transformation from doubt to advocacy had been complete, and his SEAL teams now regularly requested A-10 close air support for missions that would have been considered impossible before Sarah's innovations. Major Mitchell didn't just prove me wrong, Morrison continued. She opened up tactical possibilities that have saved lives in dozens of subsequent missions. My teams can now operate in terrain that was previously considered too dangerous for close air support, and that capability has fundamentally changed how we approach special operations in mountainous terrain. After the formal presentation, Sarah found herself surrounded by pilots asking detailed questions about the specific techniques she had developed. The interest went far beyond mere curiosity. These were professional aviators who understood that Sarah's innovations could make the difference between mission success and failure in their own future operations. Captain Lisa Chen, an Army helicopter pilot, was particularly interested in how Sarah's techniques might be adapted for rotary-wing aircraft. Major Mitchell, she asked, the terrain-following methods you developed, could they be modified for helicopter operations in similar environments? Absolutely, Sarah replied. In fact, helicopters have some advantages in that kind of terrain because of their ability to hover and make zero-radius turns. The key is understanding how to use the mountains as cover instead of seeing them as obstacles. The conversation continued for hours, with pilots sharing their own experiences and discussing how Sarah's innovations might be applied to different aircraft types and mission profiles. What had begun as a single demonstration flight had sparked a revolution in tactical thinking that was spreading throughout the military aviation community. Later that evening, Sarah met Morrison at a quiet restaurant near the base. Their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared understanding of what they had accomplished together. Morrison had become one of Sarah's strongest advocates, recommending her techniques to special operations commanders throughout the military. You know, Morrison said as they reviewed mission reports over dinner, I've been thinking about that first briefing when I told you it was impossible. I wasn't trying to be dismissive or discouraging, I genuinely believed that the physics made it impossible. Sarah smiled, remembering the tension in that conference room 6 months earlier. You weren't wrong about the challenges, Jake. The physics are exactly as difficult as you said they were. The difference was that I had been training for those conditions my whole life without realizing it. That's what I keep trying to explain to people, Morrison replied. Innovation isn't about ignoring limitations, it's about finding creative ways to work within them. What you did was identify capabilities that existed but had never been properly utilized. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah's crew chief, who had been invited to join them for dinner. Rodriguez had been promoted to senior sergeant following his role in supporting the groundbreaking mission, and his expertise in A-10 maintenance had been crucial to the success of the mountain warfare techniques. Major, Rodriguez said as he sat down, I just got word from maintenance control. The modifications we made to your aircraft for mountain operations are being standardized across the entire A-10 fleet. Every Warthog will be equipped with the enhanced terrain-following radar and improved flare dispensers. The technical modifications that Rodriguez had implemented were as important as Sarah's flying techniques. The A-10s now carried specialized equipment that enhanced their ability to operate in mountainous terrain, including upgraded navigation systems and defensive countermeasures designed for low-altitude flight. How many aircraft have been modified so far? Sarah asked. 47 and counting, Rodriguez replied. And I've been getting calls from maintenance chiefs at other bases asking about the upgrade package. This is going to change how A-10s operate worldwide. The broader implications of Sarah's innovations were becoming clear. Military bases around the world were requesting training in mountain warfare close air support techniques. Pilot training programs were being updated to include low-altitude terrain-following methods. Even aircraft manufacturers were studying the mission data to understand how future designs could better support these new tactical approaches. 3 weeks later, Sarah received orders that would define the next phase of her career. She had been selected to establish and command the Mountain Warfare Close Air Support Training Squadron, a new unit dedicated to teaching the techniques she had pioneered. The squadron would be based in Colorado, where the high-altitude terrain provided ideal conditions for training pilots in advanced mountain flying methods. Morrison received similar orders, tasking him with establishing a corresponding ground unit that would train special operations teams to coordinate with close air support in mountainous terrain. The symbiotic relationship between air and ground forces that had made Operation Mountain Thunder successful would now be formalized into doctrine and taught to the next generation of military professionals. On her last day at Bagram before transferring to her new command, Sarah took one final flight over the Hindu Kush Mountains. The valleys that had once seemed impossibly narrow and threatening now felt familiar, like old friends that had tested her skills and found them adequate. The Taliban stronghold that had been eliminated during Operation Mountain Thunder remained a crater in the mountainside, a permanent reminder of what could be accomplished when innovation met determination. As she flew through the same valleys where she had first proved that the impossible was possible, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months earlier, she had been just another A-10 pilot, competent but unremarkable. Now she was pioneering tactics that would influence military aviation for decades to come. But, perhaps more importantly, Sarah had learned that the greatest limitations were often self-imposed. The Taliban stronghold had seemed impregnable only because everyone had accepted that it was impregnable. The mountain valleys had seemed impossible to navigate only because no one had tried to understand them well enough to find a way through. Bagram Tower, Warthog 1 requesting departure clearance for final time, Sarah transmitted as she prepared to leave Afghanistan. Warthog 1, Bagram Tower. You are cleared for departure. Thank you for everything you've done here, Major. You've changed how we fight in these mountains. Sarah climbed away from Bagram for the last time, but she carried with her the knowledge that her innovations would continue to protect soldiers and accomplish missions long after she had moved on to new challenges. Morrison's SEAL teams would continue to operate in terrain that had once been considered too dangerous for close air support. Other pilots would learn the techniques she had developed and adapt them to new situations and environments. The impossible had become possible, and, in doing so, had opened up a world of new possibilities that no one had imagined before a female major in an A-10 decided to prove that Navy SEALs could sometimes be wrong about what was impossible. Years later, military historians would analyze Operation Mountain Thunder as a turning point in close air support doctrine. They would study Sarah's techniques and Morrison's tactical innovations, and they would teach future officers about the importance of challenging assumptions and thinking beyond conventional limitations. But, for Sarah, the most important lesson had been simpler, that impossible was just another word for a challenge that hadn't been met yet. And, in the right hands, with the right aircraft, and, with the right determination, even the most impossible challenges could become routine operations that saved lives and accomplished missions that others had deemed beyond reach. The legacy of that first demonstration flight lived on in every A-10 that flew nap of the earth through mountain valleys, in every SEAL team that received close air support in previously impossible terrain, and in every pilot who learned that the boundaries of what was possible were limited only by their willingness to challenge what everyone else believed to be true.